They call Michael Jordan the greatest legend on the court, but no one ever imagined he'd face a legal battle that could shatter his entire legacy. What could drive a champion, a man built for victory, to stand trial like this? Will he outmaneuver the system like he did his rivals? Or is this the one opponent he can't defeat? Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe to Shoaib Buzder's channel for more powerful stories that challenge everything you thought you knew. Michael Jordan lifted his gaze toward the massive wooden doors of the Blackwood County Courthouse. The imposing facade loomed against a sky brushed with early morning haze, its columns streaked by decades of weather. The air smelled faintly of damp stone and aged varnish, a testament to the countless trials that had played out within these walls. Reporters shuffled about on the courthouse steps, their cameras and microphones brandished like weapons. The atmosphere crackled with tension. Even the dusty sunlight filtering through the columns felt subdued. At the top of the steps stood Judge Patterson, a middle-aged figure with sharp, watchful eyes. From the vantage point of curious onlookers, he appeared calm yet slightly amused, his stance betraying a confidence that many said bordered on arrogance. Though most people in the crowd were strangers to him, they recognized his reputation. He was notorious for his incisive wit and for treating high-profile cases like primetime spectacles. That morning, Patterson wore a small smirk, lips curved as if he already knew how this day would unfold. Prosecutor Gray, a tall, sharp-suited man in his late 40s, stepped into the main hallway of the courthouse. The cold marble floor reflected the bright overhead lights, creating a stark contrast with the dark wood paneling on the walls. An air of triumph wreathed Gray with every step. Rumor had it he had prepared for this case meticulously, confident that once Michael Jordan entered the courtroom, the legendary athlete would be cornered, forced to bow to the law he had supposedly tried to skirt. Jordan had arrived earlier, quietly slipping through a side entrance with his defense team. Still, word spread fast. Michael Jordan was in the building. The hush of anticipation rippled like static through the corridors. By the time he entered courtroom B, a low buzz of excitement filled the air. Wooden benches creaked under the weight of spectators, journalists, and curious onlookers who had lined up for hours, hoping to witness an event that promised drama and spectacle in equal measure. Courtroom B smelled of old leather, dusty legal tomes, and a faint trace of disinfectant. Tall windows let in strips of morning light that fell across the center aisle, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The whir of cameras, the rustle of legal documents, and the barely hushed murmurs of the crowd created a backdrop of tension. At the front, behind a large polished desk, sat Judge Patterson. He tapped his fingers on a stack of folders, scanning the crowd with an almost indulgent smile. "All rise," announced the bailiff, and the room promptly stood. A moment passed in quiet stiffness before Judge Patterson settled into his seat. He took a moment to flip through the documents in front of him, occasionally raising an eyebrow or shaking his head. Then, with a measured exhalation, he looked up. "So, we have Michael Jordan, the living icon who thinks he's above the law," he said, his voice carrying a hint of dry humor. Prosecutor Gray's lips curled into a grin, and a few spectators chuckled in anticipation. In the gallery, pens scratched across notepads, camera shutters clicked, capturing Jordan from multiple angles. Michael Jordan sat at the defendant's table, hands folded. Though he had faced countless high-pressure moments on the basketball court, this environment felt colder, more ominous. Still, his expression betrayed nothing. His dark suit was neatly pressed, a silver watch on his wrist glinting in the overhead lights. He glanced at Judge Patterson calmly, his mouth set in a straight line, eyes revealing no panic, only quiet focus. Patterson let out a low chuckle. "I hope you're prepared, Mr. Jordan. This isn't a post-game interview where you can charm your way out of questions. This is a courtroom." The judge paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. Laughter rippled in the seats behind the prosecution. Jordan, however, remained still. Prosecutor Gray leaned forward, adjusting his tie with confidence. "Your Honor," he addressed the judge, his voice smooth and practiced. "Today we will show clear evidence that Mr. Jordan and his athletic tech company, MJ Dynamics, have knowingly violated regulations. They bypassed legal protocols time and again, as though the rules everyone else must follow simply don't apply to them." He turned sharply, locking eyes with the judge. "We are here to hold a billionaire athlete accountable." At that, a faint smirk flitted across Judge Patterson's face. "It should be entertaining to see how you plan to do that, counselor, especially with the entire nation watching this court case so closely." Murmurs swept through the gallery. Some spectators whispered jokes, others tapped messages onto their phones, and a few reporters dictated notes into digital recorders. All the while, Jordan remained still, his focus unbroken. He showed no sign of fear or amusement. Gray continued, flipping through a stack of papers with dramatic flair. Your Honor, let me emphasize the severity of these accusations. MJ Dynamics has broken fundamental safety and consumer protection standards, ignoring repeated warnings from authorities. They believe their brand sits above the system, and that is precisely why we are here today. Mr. Jordan, Judge Patterson quipped, leaning forward, are you planning to defend yourself, or should the court provide a quick lesson on how the law works? Another wave of snickers rippled through the crowd. Jordan raised his chin slightly, but he didn't speak. He seemed content to let Gray keep talking, for now. From the second row, a journalist whispered into a microphone. It looks like Jordan is refusing to respond. Is he biding his time or simply at a loss for words? As though reading the question in the journalist's eyes, Gray seized the moment. Your Honor, I believe Mr. Jordan thinks he's in one of his press conferences, where he can simply put on a winning smile and deflect every question. But this is no post-game Q&A. Today, we're relying on facts, legal documents, and the straightforward truth of how MJ Dynamics defied regulations. Judge Patterson nodded. Indeed, the record shows that the defendant has yet to make a formal statement. Mr. Jordan, do you have anything you'd like to say before we proceed? Still, Jordan said nothing. He simply adjusted his watch. The room felt as though it were holding its breath, waiting for some sign of frustration or panic from him. It never came. Prosecutor Gray strolled toward the jury box, his footsteps echoing on the polished floor. Ladies and gentlemen, you will see overwhelming proof that Mr. Jordan's company has disregarded our laws time after time. This isn't just a minor infraction. It's a pattern of behavior that endangers consumers and flouts government oversight. He raised his hand, gesturing toward Jordan. This man excelled on the basketball court, overcame impossible odds, and built a fortune worth billions. But somewhere along the way, it appears he decided those billions made him untouchable. Judge Patterson nodded, leaning in with an air of smug satisfaction. The aura around him seemed to say he'd already made up his mind. Mr. Jordan, you'd better speak soon, or I'll assume there's no defense worth presenting. Finally, Jordan lifted his eyes, fixing them on the judge. He stood up slowly, the hush in the room intensifying with every second. When he spoke, his voice was steady, unhurried, carrying only the faintest hint of amusement. Your Honor, I'd like to thank Prosecutor Gray for his detailed monologue. It's almost as though he's auditioning for a role in a courtroom drama. A ripple of murmurs passed through the room. Judge Patterson raised his eyebrows, no longer smiling. Jordan continued, pacing in front of his table. We keep hearing about these regulations that I've allegedly broken. The prosecution believes I consider myself above the law, as if I'm some unstoppable force. The real question, Your Honor, is whether these so-called laws even apply as the prosecution claims. Gray snorted, crossing his arms. So your defense is that you get to choose which laws apply to you? Jordan shook his head, turning to the prosecutor. No. My defense is that you're misinterpreting outdated regulations that never accounted for the technology my company has developed. There's a difference. He picked up a thick binder from his table, its plastic cover reflecting the overhead fluorescent lights. All this is the prosecution's evidence, correct? A collection of rules established years ago. Guidelines written before athletic tech had advanced to where it is now. Most of these laws predate the explosion of wearable technology, advanced materials, and performance analytics. You're trying to apply a blueprint from the past to a structure that didn't exist when the blueprint was made. A hush fell over the spectators. Judge Patterson tapped his pen against the desk, the repeated soft clicks the only audible sound in the moment. Continue, Mr. Jordan. Jordan flipped through the binder. Take, for instance, Section 18.4.5, which the prosecution relies on. It asserts that any modification to sports safety equipment must be tested against standards set forth by the American Safety Council. That sounds reasonable on the surface, except these standards were drafted 20 years ago, targeting only standard athletic gear like basic pads and helmets. Meanwhile, my company's new line includes digitally integrated apparel that monitors an athlete's vitals in real time. It's not even in the same category as standard protective gear. Gray moved to object. Your Honor, the fundamental safety principles still apply, no matter how advanced the technology is. Jordan lifted a hand. Precisely. However, there's a separate regulation that states any brand new class of sports technology not covered under existing guidelines requires an updated framework before legal action can be taken. That's Section 19.1, a direct contradiction to the premise of the prosecution's argument. He turned, sliding a highlighted page across the table toward Judge Patterson. The judge held the page up to his reading glasses, eyes moving over the text, his lips pressed together, the confidence in his posture waning slightly. Gray cleared his throat, shooting a tense glance at the judge. Your Honor, the spirit of the law remains intact. Mr. Jordan can't possibly argue that he's free from all legal responsibility simply because his gear is new. Jordan flipped another page. The spirit of the law is meant to ensure public safety. Of course, I'm not contesting that. But the letter of the law, which you've built this entire case on, has a glaring oversight. The rules I'm supposedly violating didn't anticipate technology that monitors biometric data in real time. The development is so far beyond a typical piece of sports equipment that the regulations you cite literally do not apply to it yet. Soft gasps circled through the crowd. Judge Patterson leaned back, tapping his pen harder against the desk. The skepticism in his eyes had morphed into a mix of curiosity and unease. Jordan pressed on. Your Honor, the prosecution claims I'm ignoring the law, but the law hasn't adapted to cover the innovation my company is spearheading. I ask you, how can we be judged against standards that never even considered the existence of our products? Prosecutor Gray shot to his feet, brandishing a new stack of documents. Then how about these, Mr. Jordan? Our team has compiled internal memos from MJ Dynamics. They show that you were aware of potential safety risks, yet pushed forward with product launches anyway. It proves negligence, if not outright disregard. Judge Patterson directed his gaze at Jordan. What do you have to say about these memos? Jordan took a measured breath. Prosecutor Gray, those memos discuss early-stage prototypes. In fact, the flagged safety issues were addressed long before the final products hit the market. And here's the best part. Your team conveniently chose not to include the follow-up documents that show the improvements we made. So, is it truly evidence, or is it a partial snapshot that skews the narrative? He extended his arm to present a sheath of printed emails and reports to the judge. Your Honor, you'll find that each memo referencing a safety concern was followed by solutions, additional testing, and certifications from independent labs. It's all here. The room fell silent again, tension as thick as humidity before a summer storm. Judge Patterson studied the papers, his brow creasing. The earlier smirk had all but disappeared. Meanwhile, Gray's posture stiffened, the confidence in his eyes replaced by a flicker of alarm. Jordan pivoted, facing the judge. I'm not here to claim I'm above the law. I'm here to show that the law, as it stands, doesn't adequately address the product category my company created that is a failure of regulation, not a willful disregard on my part. A rumble of murmurs coursed through the gallery. People leaned in to catch every word, riveted by the shift in courtroom energy. An hour ago, they'd expected a swift condemnation of a man who presumed he was untouchable. Now they watched a legal upset unfolding in real time, led by the last person they'd ever think would orchestrate such a defense. Judge Patterson exhaled, peering over his glasses. You bring up valid points, Mr. Jordan. I'm beginning to see that this is more complex than the simple narrative the prosecution presented earlier. Prosecutor Gray, do you have a rebuttal? Gray grasped at his papers, scanning them as though searching for a hidden weapon. He spoke with forced calm. Yes, Your Honor, we do. We have a timeline that shows repeated warnings from regulatory agencies that Jordan chose to ignore. He stepped forward, offering Judge Patterson another set of documents. These records confirm that the defendant was informed about the need to comply with existing regulations, no matter their relevance. He was told to wait for official updates before launching new technology. He chose not to, ignoring direct instructions. Judge Patterson flipped through these pages, eyes narrowing. Mr. Jordan, would you care to respond? Jordan nodded. Absolutely. Those so-called direct instructions were guidelines, not legally binding regulations. They were suggestions from an agency that recognized a gap in the existing law. I have emails from that same agency admitting they lacked the legal framework to enforce anything more than a recommendation. Until updated regulations were passed, there was nothing requiring me to halt production. He offered the judge yet another set of printed emails, each page carefully highlighted. You'll find multiple messages from the agency specifying they were in the process of drafting new rules. They used words like guidance and proposal, never language implying we were legally barred from releasing our products. Prosecutor Gray tried to speak again, but Jordan held up a hand, politely yet firmly. Allow me to finish. While the agency worked on new standards, my company conducted rigorous safety tests and sought third-party evaluations. Rather than ignoring the warnings, we treated them as impetus to fortify our product's safety. If I truly ignored them, I'd have no certification or test results to show you today. Silence settled, heavy and gripping. The entire courtroom leaned forward as though physically drawn by the tension. Even the usual hum of side conversations was absent. Judge Patterson inhaled, pressing his lips into a thin line. His gaze shifted from the documents in his hand to Prosecutor Gray, then back to Jordan. The shift in dynamics was unmistakable. The arrogance in the judge's initial demeanor had eroded, replaced by the weight of a complicated reality he couldn't easily dismiss. Gray cleared his throat in one last attempt to maintain control. Your Honor, the defendant is an expert at evading accountability. We must not allow him to twist legal gaps to his advantage. This is an affront to the entire judicial system. Jordan fixed Gray with a measured stare. If shining a light on contradictory or outdated laws is considered twisting a legal gap, then maybe the system needs to do better. I'm not subverting justice, I'm following it to the letter. At that, the thick tension seemed to snap, replaced by an electric hush. Judge Patterson set the documents aside. He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. I see now that this case isn't about a wealthy athlete flouting rules for personal gain. It's a debate over the applicability of laws that may not yet account for cutting-edge developments in athletic technology. He cast a discerning eye at Gray. Prosecutor, do you have any further substantive evidence that contradicts these clarifications? Gray's jaw clenched, his shoulders tense. He rifled through his papers, but found nothing that adequately countered Jordan's points. Then, with a tone edging close to desperation, he announced, Your Honor, we do have new evidence to submit. A crucial document that shows Mr. Jordan knew about these regulatory gaps and proceeded anyway, labeling them inconsequential. Jordan's eyes flickered with intrigue. Judge Patterson extended a hand. Let's see it. Gray rushed forward, placing a sheath of pages before the judge. The judge scanned them, eyebrows raised at first, then lowering as confusion took hold. Mr. Jordan, any response? Jordan approached, and as soon as he saw the text, a faint, knowing smile tugged at his lips. Your Honor, this document was drafted after the lawsuit was filed. Its contents are based on second-hand testimonials, referencing none of the official memos or independent lab findings. It's more of an opinion piece than an actual regulatory directive. A wave of uneasy murmurs rose behind Gray. He raised a finger as if to speak, but Jordan pressed on. If it truly were so crucial, why wasn't it part of the original disclosure? The timing suggests it's a last-minute effort to salvage a case that is quickly unraveling. The judge perused the text again. It does appear to have been compiled quite recently. There are multiple references to pending issues, but no official stamps or approvals from relevant agencies. Prosecutor, is there a reason this was not included in your initial filings? Gray swallowed, his face reddening. We only obtained it recently, Your Honor. Jordan let out a slow breath. Desperation is understandable, but it's no substitute for solid evidence. The truth remains, there's no existing legal framework that cleanly applies to my company's products. We haven't endangered anyone. Rather, we've challenged an outdated system to modernize. If anything, we should be applauded for highlighting a gap that needs legislative attention. Judge Patterson removed his glasses, setting them on the bench with a careful hand. He gazed upon the documents arrayed before him, then cast his gaze out toward the expectant faces in the gallery. He looked visibly conflicted, as though resisting the conclusion forming in his mind. Finally, he spoke, his voice resonating through the silent courtroom. Mr. Jordan, your argument is persuasive, and I must concede that the prosecution's reliance on archaic regulations doesn't hold as firmly as I initially believed. The new evidence presented is insufficient. The best path forward, as far as I can tell, would be to draft updated laws that address your advanced technology. Until then, this court finds no solid ground to move forward with these charges. An audible intake of breath rippled through the crowd. Reporters scrambled to get footage of Jordan's reaction. Gray stood frozen, mouth half open, unable to muster a final retort. Judge Patterson lifted his gavel. Mr. Jordan, you are free to go. Case dismissed. With a resounding crack of the gavel, the gallery erupted into a flurry of activity. Journalists thrust microphones forward, and cameras flashed in rapid succession. An announcer from a local news station yelled, Mr. Jordan, how do you feel about this outcome? Do you think it sets a new precedent? Jordan slipped on a pair of tinted glasses, the corners of his mouth lifting into a subdued smile. I believe logic did its job. This was never about me being above the law. It was about the law needing to catch up. He began to walk away, guards parting the media crowd as onlookers peppered him with questions. Prosecutor Gray stood at the front of the courtroom, shoulders sagging in defeat. Judge Patterson gathered his papers, refusing to meet anyone's eyes, as though he were already replaying the day's events in his mind, questioning how he had started with such certainty only to end in complete reversal. Outside, the midday sun poured warmth onto the courthouse steps. The air smelled of car exhaust and freshly mowed grass from a nearby municipal lawn. A growing throng of spectators clamored for a glimpse of Jordan. He paused at the top step, turning to face the building behind him. For a brief moment, he recalled the tension of a critical game in the final seconds. Only this time, the high-stakes competition had played out in an arena of oak benches and legal codes. He exhaled the tension in his shoulders, releasing a swirl of emotions. Cameras closed in on him. Mr. Jordan, what's next? Someone shouted. Another reporter asked, Do you see yourself advocating for policy changes after this? Jordan met their questions with a level gaze. Change doesn't happen if we never challenge old ideas. I just hope my day in court sparks a conversation about what rules we want to live by and how we adapt those rules when the world evolves. Within the corridors of the courthouse, staffers and bystanders whispered in astonished tones. They recounted how a man they assumed to be a fearless competitor in sports had become a calm, strategic figure in the legal arena. The judge, once so smug, had walked out more pensive than ever, leaving a vacuum of doubt in a system used to clear-cut cases. Legal analysts took to television, dissecting Jordan's arguments. They marveled at how he had placed the entire burden back on the law itself. Corporate lawyers reevaluated their briefs, questioning whether they might also be vulnerable to this kind of challenge. Advocacy groups championed the outcome, saying it exposed the need for ongoing legislative reform in a fast-changing world. Days later, interviews with Judge Patterson surfaced. With reluctant respect, he admitted, I underestimated Michael Jordan that morning. It was a lesson in humility, proof that intelligence and fairness don't always come in expected forms. Prosecutor Gray, meanwhile, withdrew into silence. Insiders claimed he spent hours re-examining the case, perhaps regretting his approach. Rumors swirled about a possible resignation or leave of absence, though nothing official emerged. For Jordan, the trial was just another challenge, another testament to his relentless mindset. Back at MJ Dynamics, employees greeted him with applause. The office buzzed with renewed energy, the walls lined with motivational slogans. When you can't find a way, invent one. If the legal system had to catch up to them, it only confirmed they were pushing boundaries. Yet Jordan never boasted. Asked how it felt to dismantle a prosecution once poised to ruin him, he simply shrugged. Sometimes doing what's right means standing firm, even when the world expects you to fold. He had faced the best on the court, and now he had done the same in the courtroom. Late into the night, Michael Jordan found himself in the hushed stillness of his high-rise office. Beyond the vast wall of glass, a patchwork of city lights flickered, and headlights carved luminous trails through the dark. Inside, the gentle hum of the ventilation system underscored his thoughts, which drifted between gratitude and gravity. Stacks of proposals lay neatly on his desk. Suggestions from engineers, marketing strategists, and lawyers, all aimed at preventing another courtroom battle. It struck him then, how victory was never truly final. He'd won a legal war, but the broader mission to modernize outdated systems was only beginning. A discreet tap sounded against the frosted door. One of his closest advisors entered, holding a slim folder. The Consumer Safety Commission wants your help shaping new regulations, she said, voice tinged with cautious optimism. They see a chance to fix what went wrong before it happens again. Jordan ran a hand over the folder's cover, feeling the subtle ridges of the paper. If we don't seize this moment, he murmured, we risk slipping back into old habits. His advisor gave a knowing smile. That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. They exchanged a soft laugh, an unspoken understanding that their real work had just begun. Jordan had built a career on surpassing expectations, flying higher than anyone thought possible. Now, he would channel that same ambition into overhauling an archaic legal framework. After all, nothing tested his resolve quite like taking on a challenge the world believed was impossible to conquer. In the days that followed, every corner of social media buzzed with debate. Some hailed Michael Jordan as a trailblazer, exposing how stale laws choke innovation. Others bristled at the idea that anyone could challenge legal authority so openly. Whichever side people took, one thing was clear: the conversation had changed. Individuals everywhere were rethinking regulations they once accepted without question. News anchors repeated the same burning query. Has Michael Jordan uncovered a deeper flaw in our legal system? Are we truly ready for tomorrow's breakthroughs? Panels of experts, professors, tech leaders, and policy advisors filled TV segments with analyses on how to modernize laws that lag behind the pace of progress. Suddenly, Jordan's name wasn't on everyone's lips for a high-flying dunk or a best-selling sneaker. Instead, he had become the face of a movement, urging lawmakers to keep up with rapid innovation. The message? If technology can evolve, the rules guiding it must too. At the Blackwood County Courthouse, Judge Patterson tackled new cases with a surprising sobriety, his earlier flair subdued. Word spread that Prosecutor Gray had chosen quieter cases, perhaps shaken by how completely Jordan had flipped the script in court. Whispers suggested he might be plotting a comeback once recovered from the sting of that defeat, yet the echoes of that trial refused to fade. Everyone who heard the gavel strike, who felt the shift in the room when Jordan dismantled each accusation, understood that even time-honored institutions sometimes need a push to move forward. The entire incident stood as a living testament. Real progress only happens when someone dares to question the way things have always been done. Years from now, the world may forget the courtroom drama, but its lesson will stand. Even revered institutions falter if they refuse to adapt. Michael Jordan, once lauded for his athletic grit, revealed another facet of his strength by calmly exposing the legal system's flaws. His victory rang clear: if old walls block progress, tear them down and build anew. At its core, this saga is about a man who soared above the rim and then rose to challenge a broken framework. He never claimed to be above the law. He pushed the law itself to evolve. Countless others lack the voice or reach to do the same, and Jordan's story compels us to question the rules we take for granted, ensuring they serve our future instead of stifling it. Now, I want you to reflect on this story. Have you ever felt like you were up against a system that just didn't make sense? Did you question it or shy away from the fight? If there's one lesson Michael Jordan's story offered, it's that every one of us has the power to spark change, no matter how imposing the institution. If this resonates with you, consider sharing this with a friend who might also need a reminder that progress is possible when we refuse to settle for outdated norms. Drop a comment below. How would you handle a legal or institutional conflict if you believe the rules no longer serve the greater good? Remember, we each have our own court to stand in, a place where we either accept old boundaries or challenge them to create something new. The choice is ours. Make sure to subscribe to Shoaib Buzder's channel for more stories that fuel the soul and remind us that, with courage and persistence, even the most immovable barriers can be rewritten. Keep pushing forward and keep believing in the power of your own voice. Because real triumph isn't just about winning a game. It's about transforming the very landscape in which that game is played. Stay inspired. Stay bold. The world is waiting for your turn to step onto the court and rewrite the rules for the better.